Greetings everybody and welcome back to my channel. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. I know that fall has been hitting each and every one of us differently, so I hope you're persisting to have a great time. So, I really wasn't feeling myself well enough to speak to the camera while filming this project, which, by the way, took about 68 of my best freaking years. So many mock-ups. So this week's video is gonna be heavily voiceovered. I feel like I should be apologizing because I feel like I'm not giving you the best kind of content that I could give you, like I'm not giving the best of myself. But anyway, this probably doesn't even matter that much, and I'm actually super excited to show you this week's project. Oh, if you're new here, hi! My name is Sarah Labarre, and on Fridays I like to sit down and show you a craft that I've been working on. This has mostly become a sewing channel over the months, but over the summer I did some gardening. You can expect to see some painting and all sorts of other arts and crafts. So if you're a crafty person and you're looking for crafty content on the internet, well, you can subscribe to this channel because we are here on Fridays. I'm wearing my 1905 Edwardian-ish cottagecore dress right now because I'm actually getting ready to go outside and film the reveal for today's video.
This project wouldn't have been possible without the expertise at American Duchess, whom I will link in the description box down below. Last year, they generously made available a free 19 Teens wrap cape pattern on their blog, which has since, I think, become the most viral cape pattern in my somewhat niche corner of the internet. It is based on this original 1910 garment and looks very much similar, here worn by the lovely Nicole Rudolph. You can also search for the hashtag #ADCapeCult on Instagram to see hundreds of different versions of this beautiful garment. I'm about a year late for this party, but it's never too late to make an entrance. For this project, I began by tracing and then working a few alterations into the pattern. My first and easiest one was to elongate the back panel by a foot, or 12 inches, and to stretch the side piece accordingly so that the back is a foot longer while the front remained just the same. I then made my first mock-up to get a good idea of the fit before I attempted any alterations to the pattern. So I tried the mock-up on and I found out that the shoulders, back, sides and everything are just fine except for the wrap pieces, which needed, in my opinion, some serious adjustment. Which makes sense because not all bodies are the same. I put the cape on my dress form and using some pins, I worked with the 3 darts to mold this piece closer to my own body shape. My next alteration was to add a lapel right under the base of the collar. Using some tape, I tried out different shapes until I had a basic one that I liked. I sewed an extension to the edge of the wrap piece directly on the form, and I kinda draped it so it would assume a similar shape to the collars. There I could Sharpie an approximative shape, cut it out, pin it in place and trim it until satisfied. While the mock-up was still on the dress form, I took a Sharpie to mark all the new seam lines, because it was now time to rip the whole mock-up apart to trace the new wrap pattern down onto paper. Sides and the back needed no alterations, so good for me, I guess. Every time I made a new adjustment to my pattern, I traced it back onto paper with the tracing wheel, straightened my lines and traced them again with the Sharpie for a really precise pattern. I did that with my second, third, and fourth mock-ups. I started with this original pattern piece here. Again, thank you very much to American Duchess. Chef's kiss. And after 4 mock-ups, I ended up with this totally different pattern piece here. I've added a lapel, I've widened those darts, and I've added a little darted extension down to the side to try to cover up a little bit more of the chest. In addition, I've made this little front shoulder / chest pad. I don't know what's that piece's exact tailoring name, but anyway, you can see this piece inside the front of bespoke tailored jackets. It's meant to be layered with the inner lining with some pad stitching in order for the shoulder area to have more heft and structure. The footage you're seeing right now is not something that can help you learn about authentic tailoring techniques. As a matter of fact, my techniques could only be described as bootleg. My stitching is far from being neat enough, symmetrical enough, or invisible enough to qualify in a real professional tailoring shop. Moreover, a professional tailor or tailoress would use far better materials for the interlinings. A bespoke suit is interlined with canvases of different weight and heft, in particular horsehair canvas with or without actual horsehair in it. I did not have access to this high quality product at the moment, and I was trying to go with what I already had anyway, so I went with this cotton and linen canvas. For tailoring, it was a bit too much on the floppy side, so I decided to pad stitch 2 layers of interlining together in order to treat them as one. I basted my 2 interlining layers together at the line where the lapel is expected to turn, and then I pad stitched the 2 lapel layers together. I've traced lines along the grain line with a pencil, a 1/4 inch from each other at the base of the lapel, and then more like at 1/8 of an inch from each other towards the tip of the lapel. I started my first row of pad stitching along the lapel fold, holding the fabric in the exact shape I wanted it to retain. I sewed the layers together in this sharp fold. You can see when I get at the top here that I am still giving it that fold, but I'm rolling it around my finger instead to give it more ampleness. I made sure to hold it taut so that the lapel stayed curved towards the chest, doing row after row after row of single stitches up and down the lapel. When the lines narrowed down at 1/8 of an inch from each other, I kept going. It made my stitching denser and it gave that tip extra heft and stiffness. The canvas piece needed to be added to the shoulder/chest area, just like in a bespoke suit. I've marked my parallel lines at 1/4 inch from each other before I sewed in my dart and secured its raw edges with a bit of tape. I pad stitched this piece to my interlining along the lines, using my tailor's ham and whatever I had in hand to make the garment assume its correct shape. To hide those raw edges, I went over them with the cotton tape, but I did them by hand just to have better control over those curves. I did a cross stitch to quickly catch both sides at the same time. For some reason, I took no footage of the pad stitching process on this collar piece. This is actually the interfacing for the undercollar. On a tailored jacket, the undercollar would not be caught on the fold, but actually on the bias, and sewed together at the center back. I did 2 layers, which I've pad stitched following the grain line in diagonal rows stemming from the center back. For the collar stand, that's the bit that goes around the neckline, I did my rows of pad stitching more or less parallel to the bottom edge, while rolling the fabric so that it curved in the right direction around the deck. You'll see me work on this bit again further on, so hopefully you'll understand more then. But for then, I was done with the interfacing, and I was finally ready to start cutting into the real fabric. For the main fabric, I chose this lovely wool plaid suiting on the right with accents of baby blue, white, green, ochre and brown. I chose to make the main lining out of that ochre cotton flannel on the left. You may recognize this fabric from my previous cottagecore dress. If not, you may check out the video tutorial for it in the description box down below. Some stripes in the plaid are almost this exact same color, so it's a really good fit. Finally, for the wrap piece lining as well as some decorative accents, I used a bit of this green quilting cotton, which isn't like 100% match with the green in the plaid, but it does a damn good job at complementing it. I basted the darts by hand and then sewed them by machine. I trimmed the darts, pressed them to one side, and went on to covering those raw edges with the cotton tape. I couldn't, however, do this by machine with a quick zigzag like I had done with the interfacings. I had to do this by hand, securing both sides at the same time with a cross stitch, making sure that my needle catched only one single thread every time, so that the stitches won't show on the right sides of the fabric. Once both my outer layers were prepared and pressed, I basted them onto the interfacings at the shoulder and around most edges, and most importantly, at the line where the lapel was expected to fold. I repeated the pad stitching process very much the same way I had done with the two interfacing layers, following the same lines and doing the same stitches. My stitching is approximative at best. A professional tailor would be able to pad stitch a whole lapel without a single stitch being visible on the underside. Mine are very much visible, but it's not a big deal for me because we rarely look at the back of lapels, so don't at me. I then trimmed all the superfluous seam allowances around the interfacings, and then I folded the wall over to hide all the raw edges, basting all of this in place with, again, very approximative basting stitches, and I did the same process on the lapels too. I ended up with two tailored wrap pieces like these. Here's what they looked like pinned to the dress form. Is it just me or did they already look very promising? So the original pattern from American Duchess does not feature this, but I've added a bit of interfacing at the upper back. I basted it around the shoulders, neck and sides, and then I cross-stitched another cotton tape at the bottom of this piece, being extra careful to pick up like one single thread every time I stitched, so that none of it would show through on the back of the garment. With the back panel all prepared, I attached the shoulder seams. It may have been slightly overkill, but I covered those raw seam allowances with a strip of canvas. After that, I sewed in the side panels, starting from the bottom up and letting the front part hang down. I used some ribbon to tuck most of the raw edges towards the body. I don't know why I didn't tuck that leftover seam allowance there, but it doesn't really bother me. It's kind of random, but you know, the Edwardians weren't particularly fussy when it came to not finishing their seam allowances, so again, don't at me. The main idea there was to hold the bulk of the structuring material in a smooth, crisp fold instead of letting it pucker and mess up my whole shoulder. I went on to preparing my collar. Aside from the interfacings, 3 collar pieces were cut in the wool. 2 collar halves were cut on the bias for the under collar, and 1 collar piece was cut along the fold. I sewed the bias ones at the center back, gave the whole thing a good press, and then basted it under the interfacing at the crease line. Under that line is the collar stand, while the actual collar is over the line. Holding the whole undercollar folded in the appropriate shape, I did my pad stitching rows starting from the top center back, going up and down with my stitches until I reached the bottom of the center back, and then went at it the other way down to the tips. I followed the same lines I had sketched out on the interfacing. Then I stretched and I rolled the material to make it want to keep that shape when it has been stitched through. Again, my pad stitching is probably far too sloppy for the real tailors and tailoresses and tailor folk out there, and I can live with that. The collar stand, or should I say the under collar stand, is pad stitched horizontally, and that's where the stitching got the messiest. But you know what? In the end, it worked. I just used my tailor's ham and my hands to suggest a curve and sewed. Next, I had to prepare an accent piece for the collar. This was an original feature and I loved it, so I changed nothing about it. I used that little green quilting cotton, I basted that accent piece in place in the middle of the collar, and then hand sewed it there with some small slip stitches. With the 2 main collar components complete, I could then sew them together, right sides facing each other. I flipped the collar right side out and gave it a good press. I also pressed the inner side inwards while leaving the under collar flat. I left the collar aside for now and went on to make the lining. For the wrap/lapel lining, I decided to replicate the collar accent on the lapel. I used the same fabric as the collar accent for the wrap lining, and I did it just the same as the wool one, except I made my lapel slightly smaller. I basted all the edges and cut the whole lapel section in the wool fabric. I basted, then hand sewed the cotton lining against the wool lapel to make one accented piece. These pieces are then attached to the back at the shoulder seams, and the sides were added. These were made out of the ochre flannel, which layered with the wool is gonna be like super warm. I basted all my seam allowances toward the wrong side of the fabric in order to get neat edges that I could pin, baste, and sew directly to those of the main garment. Sandwiching those layers together essentially hid all the raw edges in between and ensured a durable garment. I made sure that all the side seams were lining up, then I trimmed the lining hem a bit shorter than the outer garment. The wool hem was turned twice, pinned, and then hand stitched in place. And then I gave it a good press to smooth out all the uneven curved bits. The second to last thing to do is to attach the collar. Doing that was pretty straightforward. I sewed the undercollar to the outside of the garment, right sides facing each other. The previously pressed seam allowance on the other side should normally have been able to reach the neckline without puckering. But the thing is, tailoring makes it so that the upper collar needs to be larger than the under collar because it has to roll around it, so it needs more ampleness. And I didn't plan for this in my pattern, so I bridged that gap by hand sewing a piece of ribbon in there. I even added a ribbon loop at the center back to be able to suspend the cape to a close hook. And then finally came the last step, which was to remove all the basting stitches that I had made to hold the garment together while it was sewn. There were temporary stitches all over the place, so it took a while, but they all came out, and after one last good press, the cape was complete.
In conclusion, that took a heck of a long time. So many mock-ups. Like, I started sewing in late August, and I honestly thought I was gonna be able to publish a sewing tutorial for Captember, which happens in September. My sweet summer child. Yes. And here we are in early mid-November, ready to finally shoot a reveal, like a month and a half later than I thought. Let me just tell you, I was pretty fed up by the end. But the results totally make up for it though, because look at this beautiful garment! I'm gonna sound like a total cliche, but it is like the favorite garment I've ever made, which kind of makes sense because every time I sew, I keep getting better at it. So, you know, each make should technically be better than the previous one. This time I got better at it all thanks to some of Bernadette Banner's videos about tailoring and sewing, which I'm gonna put a few links to in the description box down below. Thank you very much, Bernadette, and all the content creators you work with to provide the information that you did, because I honestly wouldn't have done it without you. Also, this video would not have been possible without the free pattern at American Duchess, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you very, very much. I do hope I'll get to buy some of your shoes someday because your merch is the shit. Who else? Oh yeah, thank you to all of the content creators who have inspired me to join the ADK cult with their beautiful makes on Instagram and Facebook and other social media, and also by providing a wealth of information for all the self-taught sewists out there like me. And finally, thank you for watching. Have you yourself joined the ADK cult? Or even did you do something for Captember? If you did, I'd very much like to know about it. Show me your makes, I'd very much like to see them. And without further ado, let's pop this baby on and go shoot a reveal.